Hello, boy.
Hi, Paul.
Hello, sweetheart.
Oh, hello.
How's your sex life? Uh-oh.
Hi and welcome to Terry Talks Movies, and as you might see, this one isn't blurred. The focus on this video is better than the last two. I've fixed a technical issue, and thank you very much for your patience while I did that. This time around we're looking at a couple of horror movies, one from 1933, one from 1953. 20 years apart, but they were made in very different Hollywoods. They're both the same story. One is a remake of the other. The first one was made in the pre-code era, so it didn't have all of the self-imposed censorship restrictions that Hollywood put on itself so the government wouldn't do it for them, and it was also made in 2-strip Technicolor, which means they only had red and green colours on the screen. It didn't look realistic, but it was in colour. First one is Mystery of the Wax Museum, directed by Michael Curtiz and starring Lionel Atwill, Glenda, Farrell and Wray. And the second one, of course, is House of Wax from 1953, which has Vincent Price and Charles Bronson in it. And it was shown in 3D, and I watched it in 3D because I've got 3D glasses. I'll put on my 3D glasses just to make you amused. So I wore these puppies while I watched the second movie. And to be honest with you, these are quite dark. They're almost like 3D sunglasses. And so the movie looked quite dark when I watched it. But I'm getting ahead of myself here. Let's go back to Mystery of the Wax Museum, which was based on a story treatment by a guy called Charles S. Belden, who was known for doing Charlie Chen screenplays. So suddenly he comes up with this story idea called The Waxworks. It gets adapted. Michael Curtiz directs it. It's a fairly big production for Warner Brothers at the time. And it's a solid horror movie. It works incredibly well. In some ways it works better than House of Wax, but I really liked watching this one, even though it was in that rat shit 2-color Technicolor process. And the weird thing is that even though the big names in this are Lionel Atwill, who was in a lot of horror movies from the 1920s, 30s and 40s, and Wray, who we all know from King Kong, the most valuable performer in this isn't either of those people, but I will talk about that in a moment, and I keep saying that so I can foreshadow for the rest of the video. The story is pretty simple, and it runs very much like House of Wax. A sculptor and wax museum owner called Ivan Igor, played by Lionel Atwill, operates a wax museum in London in 1920, and it's not doing well. His financial backer wants to sell it or get rid of things so that they can make the money back. He needs the money. The museum's not making a lot of bucks. Igor doesn't want to do horror waxworks. He wants to just do historical ones, educational things. And so his partner, his name is Joe Worth, goes, okay, well, I've got an insurance policy, and he starts putting flame to all of the exhibits. Now, the exhibits are pretty good. You've got Joan of Arc, you have Voltaire, you have Marie Antoinette, which is his favourite, and it's the one he has an ID fix about. So there's a big fight as the whole place goes up in flames, and Igor and Joe Worth have punch-outs amid the flames. And cutting to the chase, Igor survives the fire but gets hideously disfigured and can't use his hands to sculpt anymore because they don't have the fine motor skills. He's got the same thing Dr. Strange had. So cut to a dozen years later, and Igor is opening a new wax museum in New York City. It's during the Great Depression, which probably wasn't a great time to open a wax museum, but we'll leave that aside. And the weird thing is that there are bodies that keep disappearing from the local morgue, which is always a red flag. I mean, there are about 3 or 4 different reasons why stealing bodies from a morgue might happen, and none of them's good. So a reporter who needs to get a scoop because her boss will sack her if she doesn't, called Florence Dempsey, played by the wonderful Glenda Farrell, decides that she's going to chase up how these bodies are disappearing and why, and work out exactly what's going on. And Glenda Farrell's character in this is the most valuable player in the movie. Forget the guy in the wheelchair who makes sculptures. Forget Wray. Glenda Farrell's character, Flo, is the most valuable person in this film. She is a kind of sass-talking, smart, witty, charming and ambitious reporter.
Well, I'm a woman that craves nourishment. Come on, Moonstruck, let's get going. So long, Pop. See you in jail.
In fact, Joe Siegel, one of the guys who invented Superman, said that Glenda Farrell was the template for Lois Lane. So we've got a long provenance here, and very few people know who Glenda Farrell is, and yet she was the inspiration for Lois Lane. In fact, between 1937 and 1939, she did 7 movies with Barton McLean called the Torchy Blaine series, where she played a very similar character, an ambitious, wise and humorous female reporter who got the job done. And she was incredibly popular in those movies. And so her character plays like she's a lost character from the front page, or one of those other smart Ben Hex scripts. And she is very, very funny in this. And she doesn't take no for an answer. She's ambitious. She knows that the cops are corrupt. She's a little bit fond of the sauce. And this movie came out just as Prohibition was ending. And there are a few Prohibition jokes in there. So her character I love. Her character, I will watch a dozen movies with her character in it because she is just such fun, and she balances out the horror in this film. Now you can tell this movie is pre-code for a few reasons, one of which is before the place burns down, Yvonne Igor is sculpting a female sculpture, a torso, and the sculpture is quite buxom and has quite prominent nipples.
Dusty substances.
Which would not have been allowed 6 to 12 months later when the Hays Code came in and everybody suddenly turned into a Puritan in cinema, or at least had to pretend to be. So you've got that, and he's sculpting it with tender, loving care. And he talks to his sculptures, so he's obviously got a bit of an ID fix about talking to his sculptures and thinking that they're talking back to him. They are, in a weird way, like imaginary friends to him. And when he becomes the guy who, no spoiler there, kidnaps the people from the morgue and covers them in wax because he can't sculpt anymore, one of his assistants, a guy called Darcy, is caught by the police doing bad things, and the police start interrogating him. And it's pretty clear from then, and also a couple of scenes earlier in the film, he's a drug addict. They give him a bag of drugs, and that's only seen in shadow, but it's very obviously drugs. And he starts getting strung out while the police are interrogating him, and of course he spills the beans because the police are interrogating him. That stuff wasn't allowed a year later when the production code came in. And the fact that Darcy is a drug addict and is strung out, and that feels like a much more modern film because of that. There's also the fun stuff with Flo grabbing some booze from a speakeasy delivery at one stage, which is quite fun. And she's got 2 guys that are kind of interested in her and she's interested in. One of whom is Frank McHugh's character, Jim, her editor. And they have a kind of flirty, tsundere kind of relationship, which is quite fun. And a guy who is arrested by the police because they think he killed his girlfriend when she actually committed suicide. A guy called George Winton, played by Gavin Gordon. Gavin Gordon's an interesting actor himself because he was in a very happy long-term relationship with Edward Everett Horton until the end of both of their lives. So good on you, Gavin. So you've got all of that as a backstory to this. But Lionel Atwill playing Yvonne Igor is quite good. His character at the start is urbane and intelligent and compassionate and innocent in a weird kind of way. And as he goes to the dark side, the character stays more or less the same, but there's a slight edge, and you can tell by the way he acts it. He acts the change in the character while the character is trying to hide that change from the rest of the world. I think it's a very subtle piece of acting by Lionel Atwill in this one. And because this is Michael Curtiz, they do some wonderful stuff when the fires go off, and I know I'm jumping all over the place and I apologise for that. When the place is set on fire, you get the wonderful stuff of all of the waxworks faces melting, which of course foreshadows the damage done to the facial features of Yvonne Igor himself. And it is very creepy looking as that occurs. In the same way, many years later, that kind of thing was emulated by Raiders of the Lost Ark when the Ark of the Covenant is open. There's a very fancy morgue too in New York City. The Mystery of the Wax Museum has some really great production design, which I totally love. It wasn't an expensive film, but it made a lot of money back at the time. And then we get to all of the bits that people want, which is basically when Fay Wray's character Charlotte, who is kind of okay but not really interesting in the same way that Flo is, she gets kidnapped because Yvonne Igor wants to make her the template, literally, for his Marie Antoinette. And so he kidnaps her, ties her down. He's going to cover her in wax and make her part of the exhibit. And he's got a great big vat full of wax, which has like a rain shower head at one end of it, which will then rain hot wax onto her and turn her into the waxwork. And the design on that is really quite good. I love the way it's done, and it's got an Art Deco-y feel, an industrial feel, and also a kind of creepy gothic feel all at once. It works really well for that. And this was a great decade for the director too. Michael Curtiz did The Adventures of Robin Hood. A little less than a decade later, he did Casablanca. And he was known as a women's director, and having strong female character in a movie with a title like The Mystery of the Wax Museum really works. I think that without the character Glenda Farrell plays Flo, this movie would have been much, much less than it is. It is really a lot of fun because of her, and she holds it together. And she, being the prime investigator, even though the cops are doing some investigations, makes it a little more interesting than a lot of similar kind of mystery horror films of the time. And so she's a secret source in it, and I love her in this film. And I think that's a good object lesson to many, many movie makers. If your script's a bit dull, put in a wise talking woman somewhere, and it's going to lift the game. So I highly recommend you find a copy of that one and watch it, because even though House of Wax is much, much better known than The Mystery of the Wax Museum, it stands alone really well. You can watch it even if you didn't know anything about House of Wax. You can watch it and enjoy it. See that it's a quality product, and the writing is sharp and funny and scary at times, and indeed the monstrous face of Ivan Igor is pretty well done. It's mostly a solid mask, but it does have a twisted creepiness about it and a waxiness about it, which is apt. So then I zip-panned ahead 20 years and watched House of Wax in 3D for the first time. I found a 3D copy of it online. I've got myself a DVD of it, but this is the 2D version of it. It does have a lot of special features on there, but it doesn't have the 3D. And then I dusted off, literally, my 3D glasses and watched it. There was a lot of dust on these things. And it's in 3D, it's a different film. You haven't lived till you've seen can-can dancers in 3D. And also they've got that guy with the rubber ball and the bat thing, and that works really well as 3D. It's some of the best 3D effects I've seen in a movie, and I love that part of it. And of course there is the story that Andre de Toth, the director, had only vision in one eye and couldn't see 3D effects, and Andre de Toth didn't understand that while they were doing their dailies, why everybody was blown away by the dailies, because he couldn't see the 3D effects but everybody else could. And they were reassuring him, this stuff is dynamite, this is going to work, this is fantastic. And Andre's just going, I like that story. And also, some people say, and I agree with this, that it gave a strength to the dramatic narrative of the film that the director wasn't concentrating on the 3D special effects. He just let the camera do what it needed to do for that. He concentrated on character and blocking and the direction, and didn't particularly worry about it because it was something he couldn't see. Now, the story very much parallels the story of the first movie. Instead, you got Professor Henry Jarrett, played by Vincent Price, and this is one of those great roles where, for 90% of the film, Vincent Price's character is incredibly sympathetic.
All right, Matthew, all right. I've known for some time you wanted to dissolve our partnership, and I think I may be able to accommodate you.
Here's Jarrett is a gentle soul and an artist, and there's a lot of fun at the start of the film where you see some of Vincent Price's real-life passion for art come out as Jarrett is explaining the waxworks and the fact that he only wants to do historical waxworks. And you see a little bit of Vincent Price playing around with a clay sculpture, and the way he handles the sculpture looks like a sculptor. He plays that character physically as well, just as when he becomes the disfigured stalker character, there's some really good physical acting as he is stalking a woman through the foggy streets of New York City at night time. Again, you've got the problem of that business partner who wants to sell the business and make some money out of it and get bought out by Jarrett in some way. He's played by Roy Robertson, an interesting character actor who's been in 100 things. And his character is kind of nice until he isn't nice, and he starts setting fire to the exhibits for the $25,000 insurance payout. Again, you have a tussle between him and Jared, and he also goes to the extra length in this case of turning off the flame in all the gas lamps in the waxworks, so that when the flames reach that, there will be an explosion as well. So you get a bit of extra there. And in 3D it all works well. There's about 3 or 4 planes of the 3D effect you see in some of the scenes. So you've got flames in the foreground. You maybe have one of the sculptures in the mid foreground. And then you've got the action of the characters fighting each other in the center. And then a couple of layers of background behind it. And it works well. It really does play fantastically for the action scenes, which are blocked out wonderfully. And there's one later in the film where Vincent Price runs underneath a kind of mezzanine level which is on fire and into another room, and the mezzanine level collapses just after he gets through there. Again, nice piece of action stuff, looks wonderful in 3D. So of course Jared is there when the explosion happens. A while later, his business partner apparently commits by tying a rope to an elevator shaft and jumping into the shaft. Of course, he isn't committing suicide. He's killed by his former business partner, Jared. And then we cut to the ingenue part of it, which is a girl called Sue who's looking for a job in New York City, played by Phyllis Kirk, who had a bit of a career. She played the partner to Peter Lawford's Thin Man in the Thin Man TV series for Warner Brothers in the late 50s. Really nice actress. She does a really good job of playing a nuanced character in this. And her best friend Kathy is played by Carolyn Jones, Morticia Adams later on. And Carolyn Jones's character is ditzy and flighty, but kind of worldly as well. And she's a lot of fun until she gets given a roofie and is killed, and her body is kidnapped from the morgue by Jared. That then plays into the fact that Jared's opening another wax museum, and Sue's boyfriend, played by Paul Picerni, is a sculptor and he gets a job there. And Jared is obsessed with Sue because she looks like Marie Antoinette. We get a couple of cops, one played by Frank Lovejoy and the other one played by Dabbs Greer. Dabbs Greer had such a long career. If you remember The Green Mile, he played the older version of the Tom Hanks character in Green Mile. And in this one he plays a kind of streetwise turn of the 20th century cop in New York City. And he does a bloody good job of it. Then of course we have Charles Bronson, under his original name Charles Butinsky, playing Igor, who is Jared's assistant, who is what they called at the time a deaf mute. And they got some makeup effects to kind of enhance the harsh lines of Charles Bronson's face. And he doesn't get any dialogue, of course, but he does a good job of playing a henchman. And of course Bronson had that physicality during the action scenes, which made them really work in the film. Now the 3D process used for this film was a colour 3D process. The black and white one came along a little bit later, but this was done with a colour 3D process, which doesn't entirely work. It doesn't look like the beautiful saturated Technicolor we got in 2D films at the time. But there are a lot of ways in which this movie is lesser than the first one. There's the kind of erotic sculpture at the start that the guy in the first movie, played by Lionel Atwill, was sculpting. That is very muted in the sculpture that Vincent Price is sculpting in the second movie. And there are a lot of scenes which are exact duplicates of the scenes in the first film. And I think it works better in the first movie because you do get the erotic obsession that Ivan Igor has for his sculptures in that very first scene where you see him sculpting a nude female figure. That's less so in the second one. Then you've got the other aspect of the assistant of the bad guy being a drug addict in the first one, in fact a heroin addict. And in the second one he's an alcoholic, which is very much a lesser thing and doesn't play as hardcore as the cops drying out the guy they're interrogating. And you might hear some thunder there because we're getting storms through. Maybe it adds to the horror side of things, who knows. But yeah, you can see in the numerous different points in this film where the censorship and the self-imposed censorship of Hollywood, if you wanted a kind of textbook example where the production code really cut the nuts off Hollywood, you could, with some justification, use these two movies as a demonstration of that. I think the first one, surprisingly enough, without the 3D, without Vincent Price, without Charles Bronson, without all of that jazz, without Carolyn Jones, still makes for a better grown-up entertainment than House of Wax. Now, you may disagree with me, and it's fine if you do, but I watched them back-to-back this morning, and the first one had a bigger engine, basically. It was more powerful as a piece of entertainment than House of Wax. Not that I don't love House of Wax, and I do intensely, but Mystery of the Wax Museum does have that advantage of being the first version of not having its ankles tied together, being able to give us a story which adds to the horror by being a little more grounded and a little more realistic. And the other weird thing too is House of Wax has an intermission in the middle of it, even though it isn't a particularly long film. And the reason it had that intermission is that when it was shown in cinemas in 3D, you can hear the rain as well. When it was shown in cinemas in 3D, they had to use both projectors in the cinemas to show the film at the same time. So there had to be an intermission after a certain point so that the film reels on both of the cameras could be changed. Weird reason for an intermission. I mean, I've seen long films now that need intermissions, but this shorter film needed it for a specific technological reason, which makes it kind of fun. But having said that Mystery of the Wax Museum was the better film, Vincent Price is still pretty bloody good in this. This was, in some ways, Vincent Price's breakthrough role as a horror film star. And it works. He could play urbane, he could play intelligent, he could play monstrous. And so that is where his career went for the next 30-odd years at least, maybe 40. And he never looked back. So revisiting the two films, this one and the other one, was a lot of fun. I mean, I was thinking of doing Universal horror films and stuff like that, but everybody's doing those and everybody knows them inside out. I may well look at them some more in the future, but right now it seemed a good time to do these two and to recommend them because both entertaining, and again that comparing and contrasting by making them a double feature was the kind of an experience that I love to have when I'm watching movies. Just being able to unpick the differences, unpick the changes made, the reasons why the changes were made. The different actors were a lot of fun as well. Glenda Farrell was a revelation to me, and Carolyn Jones in this early role was touching as well. Her character, even though she's ditzy, was really well played and a sympathetic character because she is helping Sue, the other girl, who's a bit down on her luck, and that kind of sisterhood makes both of those characters a lot more 3D than they would have been otherwise. So that's it for this time around. Thanks a lot for watching. If you enjoyed the video, please like, subscribe, hit the notification bell. Check out the playlist as well. There's a lot of stuff there about a lot of movies. Some I did more successfully than others. You can also support the channel by becoming a channel member or by becoming a patron at patreon.com/TerryTalksMovies. Next up, I've got Science Fiction Saturday, and I'm hitting the 1950s science fiction again, which is going to be a lot of fun. And until then, watch some good movies, watch some bad movies, watch some 2D movies, watch some 3D movies, and I'll catch you next time.